Hey everyone, Eben here. So today I'm going to be walking you through my method for creating clouds in a painting, whether you're working digitally or traditionally. This video is thanks to a fan and a regular at my live streams, so thank you Jürgen for putting in the request for this tutorial. You can find a link to my brush pack in the description below the video, and if you're new here, please don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell so you don't miss videos that I release here every Wednesday. I'm also doing a sale this week on my website, so you can check that out in the link below, up to 50% off all tutorials, brushes, and prints on the website, so please don't forget to check that out. So without further ado, let's dive into Photoshop and start painting some clouds. Okay, let's jump right into a new canvas here. And so there are a few different circumstances. There are essentially unlimited circumstances that we can find clouds present in, but let's start off with a fairly common one. So what I'm going to do first is start off with a gradient of what you might normally see in a sort of a afternoon sky on a somewhat clear day. And by the way, you can follow along with this in whatever medium you choose. You can use another digital painting medium like Procreate on your iPad or traditional. All these principles will apply. And I've actually organized this brush pack in such a way that it's very easy to jump from traditional painting methods to how we go about doing things here in Photoshop. So let's start with basically the first thing we want to think about when we're creating clouds is our perspective and where our viewer is positioned relative to those clouds. So let's draw up a few lines here and I'll show you what I mean. So the first thing we will want to decide is where our horizon line is. And that's going to be very important for how we frame this. So there are a few places you can do that depending upon what kind of scene you're setting up. So one way is to just put it right here in the middle. Let's change our color here. Something like that. Generally, I try to avoid sort of bisecting my composition like this. So maybe we could put it down here. Or I would say if your horizon line is up here somewhere, you're probably not going to be having too many clouds in there anyway. So let's just imagine our horizon line is here, and say for example we have maybe a cliff here in our foreground, and maybe some kind of pathway, and something more like a building back here we're kind of looking up at. Something like that. And so when we're thinking about mapping out our clouds, I'd say when I first started out, one of my first instincts was to kind of perceive the sky as like this flat plane, kind of like the back of a theater set almost. And so I would sort of, make these clouds kind of like this sort of thing, all the way up to the top. And I would kind of wonder why it looked a little flat and a little cartoonish. So what you want to bear in mind is that just like when you're sort of mapping out your ground, and objects that we are looking at that are closer to us, we're going to be looking at them from sort of above, whereas objects in the distance we're looking at from sort of the side. And if you think about that, the same is going to apply to our clouds. And also we're basically going to be viewing them at different angles depending upon how far away they are. So if you think about a cloud, let's see, like your standard cumulus cloud will have a form something like this, That's like our typical fluffy white cloud. It's kind of being pushed over or being moved over by some kind of air current. And if we think about it as a three-dimensional object, you can think of it as having like this sort of flattish bottom with some puffy things going on above it. And of course this will vary a lot, and There will be different variations and stuff, but that's generally how they will form based on atmospheric conditions. There are all kinds of different clouds, obviously, and I'm not going to walk you through every different type of cloud and how to make it, but the ones we're going to focus on for the most part here are just ones that have a lot more concrete form, sort of your cumulus and cumulonimbus that start to have more of a solid 3D shape. Most of the other types of clouds you can sort of represent fairly effectively with just some sort of wispy strokes, and we can get into that a little bit later as well. But so if we think about our perspective lines, let's say this is our vanishing point on the horizon. By the way, if you're not already familiar with sort of the principles of perspective and how to plot things in three-dimensional space, please leave a comment and let me know, because I'd be happy to do a video about that as well. But assuming you're already somewhat familiar with these principles, you know that when you're looking through 3D space, there's going to be at least one vanishing point that sort of dictates generally how objects will be mapped out in your space. And from there, you can draw out these perspective lines and sort of get an idea of how, at the very least, what the scale of things are going to look like as you move outward. So if we think about these perspective lines, the same object, let's say there's if we're thinking about a cube far off in the horizon, let's say a cube this size, we're really not going to see the bottom of it because we're looking at it from sort of straight on. But if we take the same cube and we blow it up, look at it from up here, we're kind of going to see a different angle. So we're going to be seeing more of the underside of it and less of this side of it, and we're definitely not going to be seeing the top. So that's why it's kind of a mistake to go in with into these clouds that are like higher up on the canvas there and start drawing out more of the side plane and the top that's facing us. So instead, we want to think about clouds as occupying this big plane. So if we think about it as like a grid, those grids are going to get smaller and smaller as we go towards the horizon line. So our clouds are going to get smaller, they're going to get flatter, and we're going to see more of the side and top of them than we are further up here. So let's just knock down this opacity a little bit and think about how we could map out a cloud on top of that. So let's say, for example, there's a cloud that's sort of, I like to use my clouds as compositional tools as well. So I like, if there's a focal point like this castle here, I like to sort of map out something that's sort of pointing at it, you know, like this. That's not always necessarily realistic, but it's something you can do. I mean, this would be sort of just as realistic, but it's not helping my composition at all. So let's just say we have a cloud that sort of starts somewhere off here in the distance and ends somewhere up here that's closer to us. So let's just make a general outline of what we would kind of expect that shape to be. It's going to get tapered generally, and of course all clouds are different, they're going to have different shapes, but generally speaking, as it recedes into the distance, it's going to sort of taper off like that. And there might be another, you know, bit of it up here. And then we're going to see, if we think about the bottom of this cloud, we're probably going to see less of it here, and then we're going to start to see a bit more of it as the cloud comes out here. And the further up we get to the top of the canvas, the less we're going to see of this side, and the more we're going to see of its underside. So, it doesn't look great right now, but we'll see in a minute. The other thing we're going to want to think about is the same cloud out here in the distance we're going to see from sort of far away. So they are going to look kind of like those fluffy, things we were painting earlier. It's going to be more of a side view, probably have a flattish bottom, and have this sort of bumpy top like that, but we're not going to see much of the bottom. And the reason that's going to become important is it's going to be important in how we shade these clouds and how we sort of lay out different values in the cloud structure. So another thing to bear in mind is where the light source is coming from. So if this is there's so many variables here, but if this is noon, for example, our light source is going to be coming down pretty much from the top, which means that our cloud is going to be lit on the top side, if we're seeing it from far away, and maybe a little bit around the edges, because the edges of clouds are a little bit transparent, so they're going to be catching some of that light. However, if our light source, kind of like what we're depicting here, is like, say we're doing sunset or sunrise or sometime in the early or late afternoon, it's going to be coming at something of an angle. So our cloud is going to be lit from one side more than another. And that might be catching some of these little variations like that. And so like this one down here, we would be seeing the sunlight hitting this sort of left side more than the right. And it's possible that this whole section could be in shadow. And of course, it's very rare, but it does happen during sunset, for example. You can have light coming from underneath, and that's a very interesting effect. Usually what you'll see is just kind of, you'll see mostly the underside of the cloud sort of lit like this. Let's see if we can just fill that in. Whoops, maybe not. Oh, I gotta connect it here. Perfect. And then we kind of won't see too much else. We might see like a neighboring cloud that's lit a little bit, but for the most part our shadow is going to sort of blend in with the sky. What we might see sometimes, which we'll get to a little bit later, is some light sort of passing through and maybe hitting the top of these clouds. But for the most part you're going to see them lit underneath with sort of a warm sunset light. So let's move on to some real examples here. So let's start with, let's just, for the sake of this, create a little, let's create a little landscape here, something really quick. Okay, and just some little cues to maybe help us remember, whoops, where our perspective is. Maybe some lines in here that are sort of coming out. Remember, the lines are going to be flatter as they recede towards the horizon, and they're going to be sort of more angled and directional as they come closer. So next, let's think about our clouds. And by the way, the gradient I've set up in the background here, this sort of blue down to this lighter, more white blue, is that's something that you'll generally see in skylines as a result of atmospheric compression. So you'll see essentially the further away you're looking, the more atmospheric particles and water particles and gases you're going to be looking through, and they will catch more of the light. So when you look up, you're not seeing so many of them compressed into a single layer. And that's why when you look at a horizon, you'll generally see sort of a lighter value down towards the horizon line. So what I like to do sometimes is just start by picking that horizon color, and then I can start to just mess around with it a bit. And the great thing about clouds is they're so kind of freeform and loose that it's sometimes easy to just sort of create them by accident, or to not really be, they're very fluid and malleable, so you don't have to be too careful about it as long as you're considering your light source and some of these other variables I've mentioned earlier. So already I'm kind of thinking about having a light source coming from the top left there. So that's why I'm just starting to map in, before I even start to think about their whole shape, I'm just starting to create some indications of the sides of those clouds where light would probably be hitting. So I'm creating one over here, and I'm just thinking like it's pretty far away. There's probably going to be some light hitting these sides that are facing us. And then maybe that can be the end of this cloud. Maybe we'll take another one that's sort of coming a little closer to us and think about some more big, broad shapes. And the edge is going to be where the light is hitting, might be a little bit thinner, just because we're seeing more of the underside of the cloud. And by the way, you can check out the link to these brushes in the description below. I've made a lot of these with this kind of more traditional approach in mind. So I'll show you a mixer brush that I use for clouds all the time in just a minute here. So the next thing I've done is I've selected a slightly lighter value, maybe even a little bit more desaturated, a little bit more of a gray, and we're just going to sort of paint out the shadow side of these clouds. And the reason I've desaturated a little bit, pulled it a little bit away from the blue where it was over here, is because the third most important element of clouds is that they're transparent. So and they're not just transparent, they're transparent on a variable scale. So when they are less dense, they are more transparent, and when they are more dense, they are less transparent. I think I said that right. And that's why you'll see like storm clouds are very dense. The water is condensed and compact and ready to form into raindrops, which is why you'll see those dark shadows on storm clouds. Whereas these are kind of just, they're sort of just floating around. They're not really close to becoming rain, and so they're a little bit wispy here and there. So you can, if you want, you can sort of create some little trails where the cloud just sort of dissipates and sort of flows away into another direction. There might be some areas where the cloud is more transparent, where it's letting some more light through, and so you can just kind of mess around with it a little bit. And when you're dealing with these clouds at the top, towards the top of your frame, remember they're much closer, so you want to think about big shapes and not so much all these sort of larger, more concrete shapes than what you might be seeing down towards the horizon. Because, I mean, chances are, while it's possible that like you could have way bigger clouds further off in the distance, maybe if there's a storm coming or something, generally, clouds in the same area will kind of take on the same form and so forth. So then we can take that same color, that slightly warmer blue, and apply it to some of these other areas as well. I'm just generally using some more rounded brush strokes here, sort of letting them trail off here and there. And sometimes with big air currents, clouds will do these fun sweeping motions off in the horizon, where they're not even clouds, but they're sort of just wisps of vapor that are being picked up by the air current, and they tend to have these nice large stroke qualities to them. So that's really easy to quickly just sort of set up with these brush strokes here. And maybe you wouldn't necessarily see these two types of clouds right next to each other, but I don't know. I'm not a meteorologist. I've just spent some time looking at clouds, just enough to create a passable impression, I suppose. So, and then we want to think also about like any three-dimensional object, when these clouds get really dense, like this one is right here, the side of the, let's zoom in a little bit. If you think about the light, if it's coming from this angle, just like a ball, the spot on the cloud where the light is hitting most directly is going to be the brightest, whereas these other areas that are sort of getting hit a bit more indirectly might not have the same level of value there. So let's just get rid of that arrow, because I forgot to create it on a new layer. And we can sort of dial up some of the highlights in these areas where the light is hitting more directly. And you can also use that as an opportunity to create some more detail there as well. And you can push the values up a little bit more towards the horizon as well, just to sort of help them pop out a little bit against the horizon value, because they are going to be catching a bit more light relative to the rest of the horizon there, but they will kind of just sort of fade into the distance as well. So we can even build up some bigger, sort of big cumulus things happening down here. I should probably finish off the shadows for these ones as well. Let's have this cloud stop here. Maybe sort of change direction a little bit. And we can have these sort of flowing off like this. Maybe there are even some spots where the light is sort of coming around the other side and sort of hitting some of these wisps back here. Maybe even catching some of these holes on the other side. Maybe a little bit in the middle there. You can always flip the canvas just to, of course, if you're working traditionally, you can't, but you can always just take a step back and look at it to see if it's all making sense. Maybe I'll have, sometimes it's fun to have some little trails that sort of go off and swirl around, do their own thing. Let's think about the other side of our canvas here as well. Maybe we can map out some other cloud shapes. We can start with the shadow side too. We don't always have to start with the lit side. Of course, you can see as I start to get down the horizon line, we don't want our shadow to be too much darker than the rest of the atmosphere there. So I'm gonna sort of hold it off there, and then we can start working in these clouds again. Maybe we can have one that kind of comes back this way, and then again down towards the horizon we're gonna see lots of these big puffy things. And depending upon the day, I mean, sometimes on the horizon you'll just see sort of these distant lines. You know, they may not form up quite as much as these are. They may just be kind of these variations in value that you'll see there. Sometimes a cool thing that will happen is maybe we can just actually let's just zoom this out a little bit so we can see more cloud and less landscape here. What was I saying? Oh yeah, a fun thing that can happen sometimes is one cloud will cast a shadow on another one, and that can be an interesting effect. So let's say there's let's get rid of this actually. I think that's sort of distracting. I'm gonna bring out my mixer brush here too, and we can start messing with that a little bit, because that's my favorite thing to do with clouds, is get into these mixer brushes and start pushing things around with the smudge tool as well. But let's say we have another cloud right up here that's sort of grabbing a lot of attention, a lot of light. We can grab a shadow color real quick from our background. Let's just remember to take it back from that blue a little bit, so it's a bit more gray. And by the way, the reason, which we'll get into in a minute here, but the reason I'm pushing that blue towards the gray is also because, excuse me, the light is actually passing through that cloud, and when the light passes through all these suspended water droplets, it kind of refracts and can become quite a bit warmer. At least relative to the other areas of shadow in the cloud. So in a denser cloud shadow, it will be a bit cooler, whereas in a cloud shadow where the light is sort of passing through a little bit, it will be a bit warmer. So let's say, let's bring back a lighter value here. Right, we were gonna make a cloud that's sort of casting a shadow over here. I'm just gonna sort of make some broad strokes as well, as if that cloud is kind of dissipating out of existence here. But over here, where it's a bit more solid, it's going to be casting a bit of a shadow, because our light source is going this way. So if we zoom in a little bit here, let's have our sort of make it big enough to be casting a decent shadow. And that actually might be a bit too saturated as well. You're going to see less warm values further off into the distance, and that's another element of atmospheric perspective, is that especially on a brightly lit day like this, because water molecules have this sort of innate blue tinge to them, you're going to see more blue further off into the distance. So you're probably not going to use this same color here for a shadow of a cloud over here, because it looks funky. So let's bring out our mixer brush again, and this brush is really great for just getting a nice painterly sort of almost like oil paint feel to your paint strokes. So let's say this cloud is casting a shadow over here. We can actually just sort of map out where that shadow is going to go. Let's just smooth that out a little bit. And maybe from that distance you wouldn't necessarily see the top line of the cloud. But in a lot of cases there might be a slight sort of outline up here. Of almost like a deeper blue, maybe not quite that much. Something that's sort of catching the ambient skylight from above but it's still in shadow, so it's not going to be as much of a warm tone, nor as bright as the white side of these clouds here. I can just dial up these highlights so that effect is even more apparent. Alright, let's return to this one up here. Just see if we can give it a bit more form, a bit more definition. Notice how like it feels like you're looking up at this, because that effect is achieved because most of the shape here is being represented as in shadow. Maybe there's some spots over here where the light is just sort of catching some loose wispiness. I'll switch over to my mixer brush because this is a bit rough for... I want to sort of smooth things out a little bit. Wherever it starts to dissipate, I like to create a nice contrast between the hard edges of like the more sort of directly lit sides of the cloud and the softer edges where it's sort of just these illuminated particles sort of floating through the atmosphere. And we can throw a little bit of that in the center of the cloud. You know, some clouds are going to have some sort of thin spots in the middle there where the light can pass through. I don't think I've ever said cloud so many times in my life. And so let's return to this. This is a good example of it here, how we've warmed up these sort of transparent areas quite a bit. And I'm going to push that even more. And sometimes what you'll see with a lot of these really great artists is they'll create these clouds with like 10 different colors in them, and you wonder like, wait, clouds are white. How do they possibly have so many different variations? But there are a lot of different factors and a lot of different light sources, and once you learn to recognize them, you can learn to push them a little more. So yeah, for example, what I can do here is anywhere where I notice that there might be, if you think about like each cloud shape is a transparent object, if you think about where the light is hitting, I can show you with some arrows here actually, instead of just motioning in the air over here. I think our light source is hitting right here. Some of that light is going to pass through to this side and maybe a little bit over here as well. Probably not so much over here because it's sort of deeper in the shadow of the cloud, but there are these locations where you can sort of anticipate light passing through, and like I said, when it does, it's going to become a bit warmer. Here I'm warming it up just by pushing it from a blue to more of a gray, but if you want, you can push it even further. If you really want to push your colors, you could even go into the reds or oranges and actually put those colors in these sections of your cloud. And that might be more apparent sort of in the closer, more foreground-oriented clouds, where you can push those colors a bit more. But off in the distance, they tend to be a little bit more towards the blue. So right now I'm actually putting down pure gray, if you can believe it, but it is it looks very warm, very reddish and orange, because it is sort of being placed in the context of this more cool palette that I've already put down. So generally near the edges where you can see a lot of this transparency happening, or anywhere where there's a lot of direct light, around the edges of the undersides of these clouds, you'll see it quite a bit. So I'm going to put that in like that. Anywhere where it might be showing through a little bit, even if you imagine the cloud kind of thins out a little bit here, we're gonna get some more light there, and you can just sort of make it up. You're telling the story for your audience. You're painting the picture for them essentially. So it's, you don't have to sort of imagine it too scientifically. Just sort of put the paint down, and that's the way it will be. You don't have to have everything be super scientifically accurate, as long as it looks convincing. And if you put it down confidently enough, people are going to believe you. So like, this isn't the most anatomically or photographically correct image here. I know that, but it's convincing enough, and it looks nice. There's a lot of interesting color things happening here, and they look like clouds. Enough, at least, for the viewer to sort of get on board with this. So, and then you probably won't see those reddish values so much in the distance there, but to sort of tweak things down here, you can do it, but it requires some very subtle shifts in color. You don't want to push anything too far in one direction or the other, because you'll end up with a color or a value that doesn't make sense from this distance. So the things that do come through from this distance are the pure light values. Everything becomes a bit lighter because there's all this light in the atmosphere that's sort of being compounded upon with this distance. Let me flip that and take another look. We can even just keep, and that's, that's pretty much it. From here you can just spend sort of hours messing around with these shapes and creating new variations and trying different things out. I generally try to keep things towards the edge of the canvas a bit looser and not quite so specific. So I'll take this mixer brush and, for example, I'll just make some large, bolder strokes because I don't want there to be quite as much focus there. But don't be afraid to just get in there. And I'm still working on one layer here, by the way, digital artists. So I'm not worried about making mistakes. If you paint a cloud in the wrong place, just pick the sky blue that's next to it and just paint it back. It's not any more complicated than that. And that's sort of I don't know, I guess sort of something I do a lot in my work is by making sort of bold decisions like this, you can build confidence in your own abilities. If you make decisions that can't be undone or reverted to with another layer. And of course, traditional artists know all about this, but you really, you're basically, every stroke is a vote of confidence in yourself and your abilities. So that's kind of why I tend to work this way, and I definitely recommend it to anyone, whether they're working digitally or not. So then, kind of one of the last things I'm doing here is I'm sort of I'm just picking some random edges and deciding that I want to lose them a bit. And I do this with almost everything that all my paintings, regardless of what I'm creating, but it's definitely very applicable to clouds as well, because they do sort of disperse naturally in this way. But it's also a design choice. So there are just some places where I want there to be some more hard concrete edges, and other places where I want to sort of let them fade out and just sort of drift into nothing, So I'm just almost picking at random, but it's not totally random. It's just I'm seeing places that could be lost edgewise, and I'm just making it happen. seeing an opportunity here to have like just a nice big sort of high focus cloud where it's just catching all of that beautiful light, and it's just making all these nice little swirly things and some little bits flying off. The great thing about this brush as well is it does create small color variations. You may have seen them sort of pop up here and there as well while you're working. So it does sort of, if you have trouble giving your creations a bit of life and color variation, which is very important, this brush will sort of help to speed that process along a little bit. And, you know, from here you can consider some other things, you know, maybe there's even some light reflected, it's probably a bit too intense, but some reflected light from the green fields far below that's coming up and hitting the bottom of these, the clouds. So we're, you know, like I said, we're dealing with so many variables, so many different light sources, but, you know, maybe it's not quite realistic for the light to be sort of reaching that far and having that much of an impact on these clouds, but it's just like something you can mess around with and look at it and see if it looks right, and if it doesn't, you know, you can just sort of paint over it or dial it back or whatever you need to do. And I'm going through and maybe creating some harder lines here where maybe the light is sort of just coming around and just barely accenting the sides of some of these clouds here. Looks like this one's sort of being cast in shadow a little bit as well, so maybe you could just push that shadow forward a little more and create some continuity in that shape to show that the shadow cuts off at a specific area, but the cloud continues. We can even reinforce that by just having that highlight sort of persist down here as well and make it really clear that there's a cutoff right there. It's a really, sometimes it can be such a convincing thing for a viewer to see a shadow. Maybe we can do it somewhere over here. To see a shadow sort of pass across an object sort of reminds them that it's in a 3D space with lots of moving parts. So I've gone and taken that shadow and then I've covered up part of this cloud, but I'm still showing its form. I'm still showing where the cloud sort of is here and where it's following, and I've pushed it back towards the blue a little bit. I can do that a little over here as well, because where it's in shadow, it's just going to have a bit more of a blue tone to it. And every time you introduce a new color, you can just start going around and introducing it to other parts of your painting, you know? And it's kind of something I do while I work quite a bit, is I'll just, you know, I'll discover something that works somewhere in the painting, and I'm like, oh, well, I better go around everywhere else and sort of see where this can fit. Here's a more of a yellow tone. I actually picked from the yellow end of the spectrum. This is a spot where it's almost like light would be sort of bouncing around in this crevice. So where the light is bouncing around, there's going to be a lot of this reflected light that's taking on sort of a different hue in that context. And then I look around other parts of my painting and I'm thinking, oh, where could that happen again? You know, maybe over here. It's probably a bit too distant to use that particular hue, but you know, you can mess around with it. I mean, that might be a little bit intense there, but you know, if it is intense, you can take your mixer brush and just sort of work it back and you know, keep working it. Creating like a very clear shadow line over here, and then I can show where for the actual underside of this this cloud is, with a slightly different, warmer hue. Maybe not quite that warm. But you see, it's like there are just so many possibilities with clouds. It's almost easier to convince your viewer of something that's going on here, because there are so many possible variations. They're going to be more likely to believe what you put down, even if it's not necessarily you know, totally realistic or accurate. And then you'll find situations like here. Oh, it looks like there's some really strong light happening over here. And there's a really good chance for that light to pass through over here. So let's take that warmer tone. We can warm it up, lighten it up a little bit. Just painting right here where that light is passing through the cloud. And then over here where it's in shadow, we're not going to see that so much. I like that tone, actually. I feel like I could use a little of that over here, where there's lots of light hitting this area. Maybe some wisps coming off like this. I also love this brush because it has a lot of texture in it. You know, you're not with a lot of mixer brushes, you can get this effect, but maybe not have as much of that gritty texture in there, which I really love. It sort of gives it a nice traditional feel to it. All right, well, I could probably go on and do this for quite a while, but and I probably will after this. But those are the basic principles you're going to want to keep in mind when you're painting clouds. And if you want to see more stuff like this, or maybe another time of day or a different context for clouds that you've seen that you want to see depicted here, please leave a comment and let me know. I'd be happy to do a part 2 to this video. Or if there's just anything you're wondering about digital painting, or how to bring your traditional style to a digital medium, or just painting in general, feel free to leave a comment, let me know. I'd be happy to do another video. I put a new one out every Wednesday, and I do my live streams on Sundays, so please feel free to pop in there, say hi, and leave a request for that day. Alright, so I hope you've found this helpful, and I'll catch you next time.